What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is a series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Black Ops 4 multiplayer. In today's episode, we're going to be covering the second of the LMGs, and this is the HADES. So first up, as always, let's have a look at the damage. And the HADES deals 36 damage within any range that you'll be able to realistically find within these multiplayer maps. Just like with the Titan, there is a possibility that this does drop off at some extremely long range value, because we have seen this sort of behavior in the past in Call of Duty, but just know that within any line of sight that you can find in these multiplayer maps, the HADES will be dealing 36 damage. This means it's always going to be a 5-shot kill in core game modes, and in hardcore it will be a 1-shot kill unless the enemy's using armor or unless you're shooting through something. Our rate of fire is 652 rounds per minute, and we can use rapid fire on the HADES, which will bump it all the way up to 722 rounds per minute, which is a roughly 10% increase to our rate of fire. Our statistical minimum time to kill with the HADES is 368 milliseconds, which is okay, I guess. It's not exceptional by any means, but at the same time, it's not painfully slow. It's just very slightly below average, but still very workable. Our minimum time to kill potential, on the other hand, assuming we're using rapid fire and we also hit a certain mixture of headshots, is quite fast at 249 milliseconds. As for armor, just like with most of the guns in this game, if you're using the HADES against somebody that has armor equipped, it will only ever take you 1 extra shot to kill. Now, I wanted to quickly clear something up in this area because I've had some confusion about this against armor. Some people have said this isn't true, it takes 2 to 3 extra shots because you get 2 to 3 armor hit markers in order to destroy that armor. Keep in mind, as you're destroying their armor, damage is still passing through, and when you do the math on it, or you can go and do the testing for yourself, you'll see that it will only take you exactly 1 extra total shot to kill somebody that has armor equipped. So now let's move on to the ranges, and like I said at the beginning of the video, it's 36 damage at any range that you'll be able to find within the multiplayer maps. I also wanted to point out that if you put the suppressor on the HADES as well, it's still going to deal the exact same amount of damage at any range. So as far as I can tell, there is no real downside to using the suppressor on the HADES. You don't lose range. As far as your bullet velocity, at least in multiplayer, not talking about Blackout here, I noticed no difference with this as well. The shot registers on the exact same frame, even at extremely long ranges. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind. The suppressor seems to have literally no negative effect whatsoever on the HADES. This also applies to hardcore. It's going to be a 1-shot kill at all ranges, even with suppressor, unless the enemy has armor or unless you're shooting through something. This brings us into the headshots, and with the HADES we get a standard headshot multiplier of 1.1, which takes our headshot damage to 39. What this means is 1 single headshot mixed in with body shots, it's not going to help you with the HADES. However, 2 headshots mixed in with body shots will be helping you. So all it takes is 2 shots to the body, 2 shots to the head, and you'll now have a 4-shot kill with the HADES, which will dramatically reduce your time to kill, and it's actually quite effective if you can manage to do this. This is how we get that absolute minimum time to kill potential. Moving on to hipfire, the HADES has pretty standard hipfire for the LMG category. It's the same as the VKM, but it is a little bit better than the Titan. Of course, keep in mind though, the LMGs in general do have a pretty wide hipfire spread, as we would normally see with Call of Duty. As for the laser sight attachment, with the HADES we actually have access to laser sight 1 as well as laser sight 2. This will reduce your base hip spread by approximately 40%, which is definitely a noticeable difference. But just keep in mind, with laser sight 1 and 2, just like we've seen with previous guns in this game, they have the exact same hipfire spread. However, the benefit of laser sight 2 is it doesn't increase in size when you're moving, whereas laser sight 1 will still increase in size when you move. And this makes laser sight 2 quite a bit more effective if you're being aggressive with the gun. Keep in mind, this characteristic also applies with the operator mod, which we'll be talking about in just a little bit. Moving on to idle sway, as you can see here, the HADES has very little idle sway. It's not going to be something that you have to worry about with this gun. For recoil, as you can see here, the HADES definitely has some recoil. It will kick upwards and to the right very, very consistently, so it's relatively easy to keep in check and control. But just keep in mind, it will always try and go up and to the right for you. Getting into our magazine capacity, we've got a standard magazine capacity of 65 rounds with 195 total starting ammo, which is pretty good, although it is an LMG, so we kind of expect a decent sized magazine. With hybrid mags though, we can bump that up to 84 rounds with 402 total starting ammo, so a nice boost there with the hybrid magazine. Our standard reload add time is 3.07 seconds, which is actually not bad for an LMG. It's definitely quite a bit slower than assault rifles and tactical rifles, for instance, but as far as LMGs go, it's not that bad. Also, with the hybrid magazine, another benefit that you get from it is a faster reload time, and it will reload in just 1.9 seconds, which is extremely good for a gun with an 84 round magazine, and I actually really like running hybrid mags with this gun. This brings us to our handling and mobility stats. For our aim down sight time, we get a standard aim down sight time of 330 milliseconds with the HADES, with no option to use quick draw on there, so that's one of the downsides of this gun, is it has a relatively slow aim down sight time. As for our sprint out time, it's exactly the same at 330 milliseconds, which once again is pretty standard for LMGs, although with this, we do have the option to reduce that using Gung Ho. With Gung Ho, we will cut that standard sprint out time down to 220 milliseconds, and just like with any of the other guns in the game currently, if you break your sprint by aiming down sight first while using quick draw, you can eliminate that sprint out time. Our standard movement speed with the HADES is 95%, which is exactly the same as the Titan, as well as all of the assault rifles and the tactical rifles, and that's not something we're usually used to with LMGs. Normally LMGs would have a slower movement speed, but it's quite respectable on the HADES. Same thing goes for our aim down sight stray speed. This is also quite good for an LMG at 40%, and a nice thing to know with the HADES is this doesn't get slowed down when firing your weapon. With the Titan as well as the VKM, if you're strafing while aiming down sight and you start firing your gun, it will slow you down really significantly, so you can't really strafe and fire at your enemy at the same time, which kind of locks you in place in a gunfight. With the HADES, you don't run into this issue. You can move at that 40% movement speed even while firing your gun. So those are all the important stats for the HADES, but now we're going to have a look at its operator mod. Now the operator mod on the HADES is the crossbar, and what this does is it kind of turns it into the chainsaw from Call of Duty Ghosts, if you remember that. Basically, the way it works is when you aim down sight while using the crossbar attachment, you don't fully aim down sight. So you don't get the iron sight picture or reflex or anything like that. You don't get perfect accuracy. All it does is it significantly tightens up your hip fire spread to the point where you can still relatively accurately pick people off at medium range, but at super long ranges, obviously you're not going to be extremely accurate by any means. And this is a ton of fun to use. The big benefit of not fully aiming down sight is you maintain that 95% movement speed while being almost fully aimed down sight and firing your gun. This allows you to strafe really quickly in gunfights. It makes you a super hard target for your enemies to track, and it just feels great. It's a nice change of pace, and I highly encourage you guys to level this gun up just to unlock this, because it provides such a unique experience that I just find extremely enjoyable. And with that, it's time to get into my recommended attachments for the HADES. For optical attachments, I tend to lean towards a reflex sight with this gun. I'm not a big fan of the HADES iron sights. I feel like it just obstructs too much of my target. And therefore, if I am going to be using that aim down sight sort of playstyle, a reflex sight is a big one for me. Having said that, a lot of the times I like playing pretty much hip fire only with the HADES, and if I am using that playstyle, I'll rarely aim down sight with it, and therefore I don't feel it needs that reflex sight. As for the other attachments, I really like using laser sight. Sometimes I'll use even both of the laser sight attachments. The steady grip attachment, this is actually one that's unique to the HADES, so I'll quickly go over this. What this does is it essentially eliminates the recoil when hip firing. You'll notice with the HADES, if you're hip firing, even with laser sight 1 and 2, you will still kick upwards and to the right. You'll still end up swaying in that direction, and the steady grip attachment keeps everything nice and centered, and it prevents that from happening. Personally, I don't feel the need to use this at all. It's very easy to just pull down and to the left slightly to counteract that, but it may be an attachment that you enjoy using. Just keep in mind with this steady grip though, it doesn't apply to aim down sight recoil, so it's not like the normal grip attachment, so if you're aiming down sight a lot, this attachment is doing nothing for you. As for some other attachments I like using, hybrid magazine I really love using with the HADES because it's nice to get that extra magazine capacity first off, because the HADES has a decent fire rate and you will burn through 65 rounds relatively quickly. But in addition to that, it's nice to get a reload speed that resembles more of an assault rifle rather than an LMG, and therefore the combination of those is just great, and therefore you'll often see hybrid mags on my classes. Also, the suppressor is amazing with the HADES because there's just no downside to it. You're still going to be dealing exactly the same damage at all ranges. And finally, rapid fire is a decent choice. It's definitely going to reduce your time to kill a little bit, but at the same time I have noticed that it makes it slightly more difficult to control the recoil at longer ranges with rapid fire. And also, I really feel like it's not a necessary attachment. Therefore, sometimes I use rapid fire and other times I decide just to drop it. So finally, this brings us to a couple great example classes I have for you guys with the HADES. This first one is my more aim down sight style HADES class. So with this, we're going to be using the reflex sight, we're using suppressor to stay off the radar, hybrid magazines to get that fast reload as well as larger magazine capacity, rapid fire just to make it so our time to kill is a bit more competitive with a lot of the other guns in the game. We've got a launcher on this, mainly just due to the fact that we had an extra point available when I had everything else that I wanted. Stim shot because I absolutely love the stim shot, it's kind of a crutch for me. Special issue equipment because it's free. Gung ho to reduce that sprint out time so we can be relatively aggressive with this. I actually treat this more like an assault rifle rather than an LMG, and that seems to work out quite well, and gung ho really helps with this. And finally, dead silence, just so I can flank those enemies and people with headsets won't be able to hear me. Plus, I don't have to listen to my own footsteps, which allows me to focus more on what's going on around me. This class is excellent for flanking enemies, going on those longer streaks because they won't be able to find you, and there's no downside for using that suppressor, which is awesome. For the second class, this one's going to be a little bit different. This one is all about hipfire, and I love using this class setup because there's nothing else like this in the game. With this, we are going to be using the crossbar operator mod. We've also got laser sight 1 as well as laser sight 2, and once again, we're using hybrid magazine on this. Now with Laser Sight 1 and Laser Sight 2 combined with the Operator mod, we get insanely good hip fire that doesn't increase while we're moving, which is awesome. We get that full 95% aim down sight strafe speed with this, which makes you a super hard target to hit. So if you are using this class setup, make sure you're strafing back and forth in your gunfights. It's going to help you a ton. Once again, we're using stim shot as well as the special issue equipment with this. And unfortunately, that only leaves us one pick 10 point for a perk. And this perk is definitely going to be gung ho. This allows us to come out of sprint much faster, which is quite important when you're hip firing. And it allows you to land those initial shots pretty much immediately, whereas most other people are going to aim down sight before they get their first shot off. And that's where another big advantage comes with using this class, is you start hitting your shots immediately, unlike everybody else in the game. This class is so much fun. I highly encourage you guys to give it a go. It will require you to fully level up the Hades, but it's absolutely worth it for this crossbar operator mod. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for the gun guide on the Hades. Of course, as always, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the Hades? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Do you think it needs a nerf or a buff, or it's fine how it is? My personal thoughts, I really enjoy the Hades. I think it's a really fun gun to use. I don't think it's particularly powerful. It's not one of the best guns in the game or anything like that, but I enjoy using it. I think it's a decent enough gun, and I really, really like using it with its operator mod. To me, this is the highlight of this gun, simply because it provides such a unique and enjoyable experience. As always, if you guys have missed any of the previous episodes of Gun Guides, I will leave a link to the playlist down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Yeah.